All right, I'm gonna kick it off. Those that are late are late. They'll miss the fantastic intro. So let's get going. All right, how cool was that? All right, so let me go to the slide deck. Let's see if everybody can see this. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. We have a lot of people on the call here. There's people from all over Europe. I've seen people from the Middle East, from Egypt. There's people from all over, so this is really cool. We'll start with introducing ourselves. So we will be your hosts today. My name is Luc Schoonaert. I'm Director of Technology at Exclusive Networks Belgium. For people that like to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Crimson Core, connect with me on LinkedIn. My background, I've been for 10 years now Director of Technology at Exclusive, focusing on all the new emerging technology. And let's say the last 4 or 5 years mainly focused on anything to do with digital forensics, instant response, threat hunting, all the the more advanced kind of attacks that we see. So that's enough about me. I'll let PJ introduce himself.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks for everybody for being here. My name is Peter Jan Baton, working for Exclusive Networks now more than 11 years, I think. A security engineer. I've been working with all the security products we've had in our product portfolio, but the main thing I'm focusing now is the newer emerging vendors, together with Luke, looking at these technologies. And I'm also a trainer, and I love to build workshops. So lab building, that's a big passion of mine as well. So thanks for being here.
All right, thanks, PJ. So agenda today, we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction on what is threat hunting and what's the value and where are we taking that. We'll go into the actual training that this webinar is about. So we built a 2-day training around threat hunting and visibility, and we'll show a few things on what the training is about and how we built that and how you can experience that if you decide to join the training. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current state of network breaches and what we see happen worldwide, EMEA-wide, and what are the new trends or that we've been seeing the last, let's say, year or two, especially with ransomware. I'll talk a little bit about who should attend this training. So who is the target audience, so what you get out of it. We'll have Q&A, and I would like to say, like, you're all on mute because there's too many people to kind of open it up. But if you do have questions, there should somewhere in this GoToWebinar GUI, there should be a questions box. So just drop a question if you want to know something. I don't mind getting interrupted. So just shoot away. It's more fun if we get questions than if I start water hosing for maybe half an hour or 45 minutes. So happy to get questions. And at the end, we will be giving away a free seat for the next training. So stick around. If you're not on the call when we give that away, then it goes to somebody else. And also, I just wanted to mention, I saw there are some vendors on here. There's also a bunch of exclusive employees. Well, you're not gonna be winning this free seat. This is gonna go to somebody not a partner from not vendor or not exclusive employee. So that being said, let's kick into this. So a lot of hype over the last few years, threat hunting, a lot of vendors talking about, oh yeah, threat hunting here, threat hunting there, and it's it seems very often like, oh, you use the threat hunt tool and you're going to be good, right? So what is threat hunting really? And a lot of enterprises, might not ever reach that maturity, but it doesn't mean that adopting the approach is not going to be very valuable, even if your end goal is not actually going to be performing proactive threat hunting campaigns, right? So the idea here is that this is like a hypothesis-based methodology. That means you're going to make a certain assumption of attacker activity, whether that's insider threat or some adversary that is actually going on in your environment, and you're going to look at the techniques that these guys are using in the environment proactively. That means that you have a team of people that is going to go and look through data in order to find whatever your hypothesis is. Yeah, that of course means that you need to have data to go through, and you need centralized data. It also means that this is a recurring task. It's not something like that you do once. Like, it's not like I'm doing a pen test once a year. This is something that you would do on a frequent basis, maybe weekly or every 2 weeks. And ideally, this is something where different members of a SOC take their turns, right? That you don't have a dedicated threat hunting team, but that you would have like an analyst perform threat hunting at a certain point, and that you have maybe an incident responder do threat hunting, so that they get to understand the environment better. So we're going to talk a little bit about collecting data, and there's different kinds of data that are useful, whether that's log analysis or network packet captures or host-based data. Something that I'll explain in a little bit is TTPs, and for those that haven't heard about the term, I'll try to keep it as light as possible on the abbreviations. But TTPs is like one of these things that MITRE put out there. The MITRE framework that's been around for 3 or 4 years, I think now. I will go into that. It basically talks about like, what are the attackers, what are the adversaries going to do? What is their behavior? We're not looking for indicators. So we're not looking for IP addresses or hashes. And the whole idea with this threat hunting is that, well, you're going to trigger. Well, you're not going to trigger on an alert. You're actually going to go and look for stuff. And what you will learn by doing this is kind of understanding what your network looks like, what's normal, and kind of start suppressing the stuff that's normal. That's what we call baselining. There's also a lot of hype over the last years on machine learning. So in the course, we also explain when we go through the different labs where machine learning actually really brings something to the table, because we see again a lot of marketing fluff going on, like, oh, we have machine learning, we have AI, and it's like, why? What problem is that going to fix, and what data sources are you actually using to do the machine learning? Not everything is a machine learning or an artificial intelligence problem, right? So that it's important to understand where that actually fits in. So some examples of what is then this hypothesis, or what could this hypothesis be? It's kind of like, if we know that attackers use DNS traffic for command and control, for example, do we see that kind of behavior in the environment? Do we see command and control going out through our firewalls that's tunneling over DNS? And this is where it kind of starts. Like, how do I get to that information? How do I get to have those logs, right? And if you don't have DNS logs, you're not going to be able to build that hypothesis. So then you have to go back and talk to your operational team and say, well, if we want to do this, we need this kind of data, right? Same kind of thing, like if we know attackers are using tools like PSXAG or remote desktop protocol for lateral movement, do we see something like that happening in the environment? And is that something malicious, or is that normal? And again, this is how we're going to look at the behavior, and we start to learn what is actively happening in the environment that is fine, and what is something that might be misconfiguration, and maybe something that is actual malicious behavior, right? So the question you try to answer is like has somebody done this on my network, or is somebody doing this, right? Another example is a lot of attacks nowadays are using PowerShell, living off the land. They're using obfuscation to get past AV and signature-based detections. Now, if you know your environment does not use PowerShell, then first of all, the fact that you are having PowerShell activity is suspicious, and you should look into that. And on top of that, if those are obfuscated scripts that are running, that's a big red flag, right? Why would any valid kind of PowerShell activity be obfuscated? So if you would be looking for that, well, then it's going to be very obvious to kind of find that, where your firewall or your antivirus will have problems with that, because they're just scripts, right? And they're obfuscated, so they can't signature those things. So, and like I mentioned, it's a repeatable process. Like you go through this exercise, say, let's look for this, like this hypothesis. Let's look for psexec in the environment. Are we using this? Are admins using this? No. Have we found instances where it has been used, and what's been going on? And do we have the right data to kind of go and check if we see something like this happen, and maybe then go back to our SOC and kind of build some detections on what we find in the environment. The whole idea here of threat hunting, and this is also like linked to red teaming and blue teaming, which we also deal with in the class, is we're gonna assume breach. That means no matter how many defenses you have, an attacker can get through, right? This is what we see over and over and over. The preventative approach of going to say, like, we're going to stop everything, it's not gonna work, right? That works for a certain amount of time until it doesn't. And the question to us then is, if those preventive measures fail, do I have anything else behind those layers of defense that actually can show me what happened or what is going on? And we don't really initially care about how the adversary got in. And I'll talk about that later on, what we're seeing in the field on techniques that they're using. And what we also see is that AV and intrusion prevention and firewalls and a lot of the technology is not going to be helpful for most of this stuff. It will do attack surface reduction. It's going to stop the very obvious malware out there that's just off the shelf stuff, and that's fine. But how do we deal with the other stuff? And one of the other marketing hypes is like zero-day attacks and exploits and all this stuff. It's not really that relevant. 0 days. Most companies are never going to experience a zero-day attack, and nobody's going to blow $1 million on you if they can get a user to kind of click on a link and execute code, right? The most prominent use of zero-day exploits was, I think, about 10 years ago now, 2009, 2010, Stuxnet, where it was a nation-state attack where the target was the nuclear power plant of Iran, and they had a bunch of 0 days that they used specifically targeted to Siemens controllers or something like that from the turbines that Iran was using for enrichment. But that's not what you're going to run into, right? So again, we don't really care about those things too much. Same thing with exploits. A lot of the stuff that we see right now doesn't use exploits, or very, very limited amount of exploits. So again, the training itself is I think 95% living off the land. We're using the tools that are available, and that of course is the problem for your AV technology or for anything that's signature based. These are valid Windows tools, right? You cannot flag them as malicious because they are signed by Microsoft. They're part of the operating system. So the key here is that when you go into this assume breach mindset, where you kind of accept that, yeah, well, something can get through, and this is another one of those things where I think the security industry, and I've just been reminded that I've been 10 years as exclusive, I've been 25 years in cyber now. That the whole idea of we're gonna prevent all the bad things from happening from you is not true. It's just bullshit, right? So what you need to get is visibility. And what we have seen over all these years of getting this message like block and prevent everything, and if we see something happen, we're gonna have to block it. Well, that's not gonna help you. Some things you simply cannot prevent from happening. So the mindset of people has for a very long time, and I think that still lives, is, well, it's not fair, right? Boo-hoo, it's not fair. The attackers just need to find one hole in my defenses and they win. I would like to debunk that. That's not correct. The attacker, and as you will see on the right side of the slide, has to kind of go through a whole bunch of steps in order to achieve his or her goals. And that might be exfiltrating data, it might be encrypting your servers, it might be espionage, it might be whatever. But when they get into the environment, they're not gonna land, on your pot of gold or on your, intellectual property. They're gonna have to kind of find their way through there. And they only win when they actually get to do that undetected and either encrypt your data or exfiltrate whatever they want to exfiltrate. And every step that they take in that journey, there is a chance for you, the defender, to detect that and to contain that. And this is what the last point here is, if you can detect very quickly and very accurately, and you can also respond to that, what is going on. Like if you can detect there's recon going around in the environment, and there is some really weird stuff, and you can detect recon, because you're probably not going to be able to stop recon. There's just a lot of Windows stuff that happens in an environment that it looks exactly the same. So if you can actually detect that, and you have the right data, and you can then respond to that, well, then you have prevention, because now you had an incident where somebody got through, somebody got phished, or they got into a system, but they were never actually to spread laterally or to exfiltrate data. So then you win as a blue team, or as the enterprise. So it's a different mindset you have to have about, well, if I can't prevent it, then it's not useful. Huh? So and in order to do that, visibility is going to be really, really important. If you don't know what's on the network, if you don't know what's going on, well, yeah, you're not going to detect any of this stuff, right? If you don't stop it initially when it comes in, then end of story. So we focus in the training a lot on the MITRE framework. And MITRE, actually, probably most people have heard about MITRE by now. Also known in the past from the CVE, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Database. Also STIX and TAXI for threat intelligence feeds. And the last few years, they've been really putting a lot of effort in the attack framework, as they call it. And MITRE is like non-profit organization. But the cool thing here is that finally, in the security industry, we have a common language that describes the tactics, the techniques, and procedures of an adversary in the environment. And we see major industry adoption on that. So we see a lot of vendors are starting to adopt these references, these MITRE techniques in their GUIs, in their detections. That means that if I have a firewall from vendor X and then an EDR from vendor Y, and then maybe whatever other detections that I have going on, they'll start referencing the same thing. We have a common language, which is, I think, a very good thing, instead of having like 15 different names for the same thing, right? Because then you can't correlate stuff. So what you see here is like on the top part here is the tactics. These are things that the attacker is going to have to do, and maybe not all of them, but typically they're going to have initial access. However that happens, and I'll talk about it later on, they'll have to execute code. Typically they'll have to do some privilege escalation, move around laterally, and so on. And they're not going to do everything in this matrix. But the idea is here that you know what their strategically what their tactics are, and then it goes vertically into the techniques that they can do. Like for example, for lateral movement, there's a whole bunch of techniques that are documented how they work, right? And then the procedures go into detail on how would you actually apply that technique in an environment. So this is the basic groundwork that we're also going to be using in the 2-day training when we're talking about attacks, and when we're going to perform the attacks, and also when we're going to build detections and kind of explain like how do you detect this without needing a specific like signature or an IP address or a username or whatever, right? So I'll let PJ explain a little bit what the training is about. We'll go also through some of the material here, but I'll give the word to PJ here and let him take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Luke. So yes, what is the training about? As we've already said, it's a 2-day training. We deliver it, and the main thing, it's hands-on. There will only be like 2 hours of slides covering the basics, and then we dive into building on what you're seeing on the right-hand side. Okay, so you see 2 parts there. You see the top part and the bottom part. The top part is the stuff we are providing for you guys. It's for centralized log management, pulling the logs. But the bottom part, that is what every student is going to have. They will have a student machine in the same domain, so everybody will be working in the same environment. It's really exciting seeing the logs from all of these people working live. And the idea there is that we start from no log collection at all to explaining how do we enable log collection on the Windows machine and how do we manage to ship it through a pipeline that's not only going to collect the logs, but also is going to enrich these logs and make sure that everything is ready to start doing the threat hunting. And actually, that is the goal of day one. So that is chapter one. And chapter one is building the infrastructure. And while building the infrastructure, we're using common techniques like, for example, Docker, because we are seeing in the real world that many solutions that have a data lake, SIEM solutions, they are using container technologies in order to build these different components that make the pipeline. Okay, so we will build the stuff using Docker. We will use Container, and actually the tooling we have chosen is an Alex stack. We're using Elasticsearch, but you should not be too focused too much on why we're using Elasticsearch. It's similar as using Splunk or any other SIEM solution. The idea that we want to bring over to the students is what kinds of tools do you need to build such a pipeline? Okay. For example, here you're seeing Logstash. The idea is we get logs into our environment, and then we need to find a mechanism in order to enrich it. Okay, so we're going to use Logstash for that. But we're also going to be integrating with other tools that we use, like in the enrichment chapter, you will see we will leverage APIs to a frequency server, for example, but you can also use APIs to external data sources to get reputation about domains, etc., etc. So we're going to build that, and at the end of day one, you have a fully set up data lake. We have configured the Windows machines with Sysmon and WinLogBeat in order to ship all of that stuff. Okay, yeah, sorry, Luke, maybe I'm going back and forth a little bit too much.
Okay. Just get everybody confused now.
Yeah, maybe you should just go and click on the Alex stack there, the main ID there. So there are all the components. So this is basically what we are building. So at the bottom side, we have our Windows machines. We install Sysmon, a Beats agent to actually push these logs into our ALEC. Their enrichment is happening, and Kibana is going to be our interface for looking for specific techniques described by MITRE. And we can use it to start alert on. And that is actually, when we're all ready, we go to day two. And as you can see here, the different chapters that we are going to cover, for example, recon, persistence, credential access. These are all techniques that refer to MITRE, to the MITRE framework. And we will pick, initially we will pick specific techniques out, but at the end of day two, we will actually go to code execution and process spawning. We will start using an attacking framework. So let's quickly look at, for example, credential access. So how is such a lab or an example build up? The credential access technique, it's described again in the MITRE framework. So we will zoom on the description on what it is. Basically, it's dumping LSAS memory. And a very common technique or tool used for that, for example, is Mimikatz. So we'll go through about how Mimikatz is working, how it's able to actually dump the information from LSAS, and how it is going to process that information. We will use the tool, we will execute this tool in our lab environment, and see then what is happening. Now, we're not just focusing on Mimikatz, there are different techniques of doing the credential dumping, so we'll also cover those. Why? Because it is very important to make, in the second step, a detection rule that is not focused on a single technology, like Mimikatz, for example. As you will see in the detection part, These are on top, we see all different toolings that can be used to do that credential dumping. And then depending on the tool, the triggers in the operating system that we can focus on, okay? And that's the basis of the second part of the exercise, building then a detection rule that is going to detect all kinds, in this case, of credential access techniques. Second step is, and the third step is then to configure alerting. We have a query, we can look for information. So how are we then going to alert on that when something is happening? Okay. In this case, we're using ElastAlert, but that could be any other tool responsible for searching for information and sending out a message through a webhook. In our case, it's going to be a communication channel with Slack. Okay. So as I said, we're going to do recon systems credential access, and then we are going to actually put everything together, and we will start working with Metasploit. Okay. There we will make sure, first of all, that on a patient 0, we manage to have code execution, meaning that that endpoint is going to beacon out towards our command and control system. And yeah, we will do recon on that one. We do credential access on that one, and we will see that all of the attacks detection rules and dashboards we have created throughout the previous labs, they will start triggering. And immediately in the dashboard that we have built in Kibana, you will see that something is going on. Okay, so that is the key of the whole lab, is that in day one you get a very good understanding of how the pipeline is working. Why are you seeing the information from your endpoints that you are collecting? Where is it actually coming from? In order to leverage that information on the second day to dive into detail into attack techniques and make the right detections and alerts. And again, this is completely vendor agnostic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks, Jay. So the whole idea is that we want people to really understand where the data is coming from and how you build these kind of detections, how the attacks work. So instead of starting with a post-exploitation framework like Metasploit and just have people, run modules or press buttons, we're actually doing the real red team exercises manually first, so you really understand the mechanics behind these attacks, and then we'll progressively make it more difficult, deal with more advanced attacks, and then at the end bring it all together with a post-exploitation framework that will also show you that whatever detections we build are still going to work regardless the tools that we are running behind it, whether that's Metasploit or Cobalt Strike or Empire, or there's another 62 of these out there right now, open source ones for that matter. So that's really important to get everybody on the same page, whether you're an analyst or you're an operational person, that as an analyst, you also kind of know, like, if I want to detect this kind of credential scraping activity, well, there's different ways that this happens, and I need to collect data from my endpoints, for example, and what kind of data do I need to collect and how do I get there and whatnot. So we think it's really, really important that you understand the complete pipeline in order to kind of, know what you want to accomplish. So why did we build this training? So one of those things, we put a lot of content in 2 days, and a lot of trainings that we've seen out there, they either focus more on let's say the operational stuff, but the majority of these trainings, they focus on the detection, only on the detection side of things, and they'll give you the whole data lake, and all the data is already in there, and then you start building rules on what data is in there, but you do not understand how this all fits together. And with this training, whether you're using Splunk or Curator or Exabeam or whatever, the components of the architecture is going to be the same. It might be a different GUI, it might be, they might have their own kind of reporting and visuals, but the components on what logs I need, where they come from, and how I ship them, and how I analyze them, and how I enrich them, it's going to be the same for every vendor. And this is where we think the real value is. So that's definitely one of the reasons we built this. We saw there's like most of the trainings don't really go into this kind of stuff. We also see more and more breaches, right? It's all over the place. And excuse me, what we see generally is a lack of visibility and understanding, right? People don't know what happened. Even after the fact, when the whole network gets encrypted, they don't know when it happened or how it started, what actually got compromised, what the attackers did. So there is still this kind of belief like, oh, my firewall, my AV will protect me. Well, yes, until they don't, right? Until they get through some way, or until there's nothing to detect. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. We also talk a lot about how do you decide what technology that you want to put into your environment and where you start, right? Don't start with threat intelligence if you don't have a data lake. Don't start with a sandbox if you don't have an EDR solution. So there's this kind of stuff, like things that you need to kind of take it as a like step up every time, and that you also know how these vendors under the hood work, because we'll be dealing here with how EDR works and how most SIEM vendors work and how AV works and how user behavior analytics work, in order to kind of show you this is what they're doing. And then the vendor will have their own detections and their own GUI and automation and all that stuff, but that you understand how they do what they do, because typically they don't tell you, right? If you ask somebody, oh, can you stop credential scraping? You get, oh yeah, we stop Mimikatz, and that's where typically the conversation ends. Now, my next question is like, well, but Mimikatz does like 15 different things. What are you exactly stopping, and how are you doing it? And that's typically where it gets a little bit shady. There's like secret sauce, and so we're going to lift the veil on how they do these things. And also like talk a little bit about where machine learning fits in, and also where the limitations are, right? What can they and can they not do, or where do you kind of hit a bottleneck or a problem. We also see, especially, I mean, we're from Belgium, and I've been also, not this year, but the year before, well, the year before that actually, before the whole Corona thing, all over Scandinavian countries and so on, we see an increased demand for managed services, right? A lot of companies, especially in the SMB and the mid-sized market, are kind of done with trying to, deal with this themselves. They're like, this is getting way too complicated. So we see a lot of our partners are trying to build their own managed services, trying to understand how a SOC works, and so on. And this is one of those things where after this training, you'll have a very good idea what a workflow and a SOC is like, because you will have built your own, basically your own SOC, or at least the cornerstones of the SOC. And then the question to ask yourself is like, am I going to build it myself completely, like with open source, or I'm going to make my own thing, or am I going to go to vendors? Where should I go to vendors and get your people trained, right? Because it's not just about products; it's about knowing, what data you need and having procedures and so on. And one of the questions typically that we're trying to answer is like, are you breached? Right? Is there something going on in your environment or in your customer's environment? And how do you know? And there, I have this quote here. It's not one of my quotes, but I find this really, really interesting. It's like the absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence. And this is a discussion we have over and over and over with people. It's like, yeah, but I have a firewall, I have an antivirus, and I have a bunch of other things, and we don't see anything, so nothing is going on. And it's like, well, you're not seeing anything because you're not looking at the right things. So therefore, it might be going on for 3 months. If you don't look, well, yeah, it's not because you don't see it, it's not happening. And this is a study, a recent study from FireEye, where they actually show like there's like prevention still covering half of all the bad stuff, but then you only have like 9% of the stuff that your prevention doesn't stop gets alerted on. Now that means there's a whole bunch of things that you're basically blind to, right? And that's what we see happen in environments. So this is actually, this training explains how to deal with that. So sorry for the noise. So
reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there's some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
So yeah, I'll let you think about that for a second here with the awkward llama. But yeah, so talking about, what do we know that's going on? What have we seen? And this is from 2019. I don't have the reports in yet from last year, but if you generally look, dwell time is decreasing, right? If you look at from 2011, where dwell time means like the amount of time the attacker basically is in the environment before detection, right? So he gets in 1st of January, you detect him next year in March. That was the situation in 2011. So in 2019, that global dwell time kind of reduced from over a year to about 56 days, right? And said, oh, that's good, right? We are improving a lot. And it's like, well, yeah, it's crap, right? It's 2 months on average that attackers are in the environment. So, and the other thing you have to look at, and I kind of looked at the report a little bit more in depth. This is average, right? 2 months. Now, if you start looking here, there's about out of all this, all these numbers, about 40% of companies kind of detect adversaries within a month, right? And we're talking probably like finance, banks, for very mature enterprises. They have their SOCs, they have their methodologies, and it proves that it's efficient there. Now you see that on the other side, there's 12% that take more than 700 days. That's like 2 years, right? So this is a problem. Eh? You still see that the majority of companies is just way behind on detecting these things. And another thing, like, yes, we have improved technology, we have machine learning, we have, you know, EDR. There's a lot of better tooling out there now, and that's part of better detection. But the other thing is, like, we've also seen the increase in ransomware in the last 4 or 5 years. So, you know, if all your systems are encrypted and there's a ransom note, well, yeah, I hope you detect that, because you have to be blind not to see that, right? So it kind of has some impact as well on these numbers, because now we're not talking about, you know, nation states and APTs that are being stealthy in the environment and, you know, trying to get secrets. No, it's like in your face, like, pay us this many bitcoins, you know, or we leak all the data if you don't pay, and whatnot. So in EMEA, and I do apologize if there's people from outside EMEA joining here, but I just took this one from EMEA, and we do see that kind of dwell time decreasing from like 177 days to like 54 last year. So that is good, but we're still talking about 2 months. And ideally, you know, you need to be at maybe 2 days when something happens and to detection, so that you can control it. What we have seen in environments is that attackers initial phase recon, yeah, a week or 2, and then that is typically when the shit starts hitting the fan, right? So you have some time, but you do not have 2 months. So, and then there's the other thing is, like, something I have a lot with a smaller enterprise. It's like, oh, well, you know, we are not a target. We don't have anything that anybody cares for. Well, yeah, well, we do see, first of all, that, you know, about half of the victims are SMB customers. And with SMB, we're talking about less than 1,000 users, and, you know, depending on your market, like in Belgium, 1,000 users is quite big. But yeah, small people, small customers, not small people, small customers actually, you know, get breached, you know, just like the bigger ones. And, you know, if you might say like, oh, I make cookies, or I don't know, whatever, you know, you make cars, or there's no interest in that. Well, you have money, right? And they'll shut you down and make you pay. That's it. You know, if you're not a nation state, you don't have secrets, you're not a bank, you know, you don't have, you know, customer information or anything like that, but you have money. So that's what they go after. One of the things that we're not dealing with in the training, but we also see an increase in internal actors, so malicious insiders that are stealing information and so on. So this is another one of those things when the attacker is already in your environment, when it's somebody inside, a disgruntled employee, somebody that's leaving the company that wants to take, you know, all the data. How do you deal with that? So just want to finish off here, I think, on what we see in trends. But the last 2 years, like give or take, the main vectors on ransomware, which is, I think, what most people are concerned about. I don't think APTs and nation states is the main concern for most enterprises. But the main vectors on ransomware that we see that kind of changed is more and more ransomware gets deployed through remote access on a remote desktop protocol, RDP, or over VPN. And that happens very often with stolen credentials or brute force attacks, right? So they're just connecting to your VPN and running the ransomware manually. So this is something that we see, and this is part of cloud adoption. We see more and more cloud adoption. People putting stuff in the cloud, opening up RDP, and no multi-factor, and it's like brute forcing and the story. Right now we're in your clouds. It's typically hybrid clouds where there's AD Connect to on-premise, and there we go. The other thing we have seen in the last 2 years is remote code execution exploits on VPN devices. So recently SonicWall, we've seen Palo Alto, PulseSecure, Citrix, not Citrix, Fortinet, a bunch of these VPN concentrators that have vulnerabilities that they can exploit and basically just get access to your VPN. And still phishing, of course, is still prominent as well, right? We're actually trying to trick the user to execute code. But one of the out of those three vectors, what we also see is that more and more targeted attacks. There's people behind the keyboard. It's not just like we're running ransomware with scattershot and hope it encrypts a bunch of systems, because who cares about the desktops, right? Who cares about laptops? It's not really gonna impact your business. But if we can get in and we can do recon, we can move around in the environment, we can escalate our privileges so that we get maybe to domain admin. Now we can run this ransomware on your domain controllers, maybe on your production systems, and we shut you down. Now you have to pay, right? So this is something we see more and more, where they get in over VPN or RDP, they're doing their whole little thing, reconning and escalating privileges, and then they manually deploy ransomware. This is not like something where it starts spreading all over the company. No, they're going to go to those systems and deploy the ransomware, right? And it's a business model, right? I see a question here about the training. What's in it for exclusive? Selling more products, positioning MSSP. This is obviously, we do sell products, but we don't really talk about specific vendors in the training. We think it's important that when you make a choice for a service or a product, that you know what you're talking about and what that product can do for you, so that you can make a match. Does this fit with my environment? Like personally, I am tired of having discussions with people like, my AV is going to block this. It won't, right? So that's an educational thing for us, saying like, look, this is how these things work, and then it's up to you to decide where you want to go. Same thing goes with MSSP, right? MSSP, a lot of customers go like, okay, I'm going to let this be done by my MSSP, and it's not my problem anymore. Well, it is, because guess what? If the MSSP finds something, they're going to come back to you, and you need to do something. So you need to understand how that MSSP works and what they're going to ask from you when that happens. So this is definitely two of the reasons why we give this training, right? So here's just a screenshot from some of the cybercrime, where they basically say, well, if they deliver the ransomware, and they say, well, actually, if you kind of deploy it over RDP, you get to keep like 35%, and if you do it a different way, you get to keep 25% of the ransomware. So this is a complete business model that is running on this, right? So who should follow this training? So target audience for students is technical, right? Please don't send salespeople. I love salespeople; they're really important, but it's not for them. It's not going to work. This is hands-on command line stuff and so on. So you do need to have a technical background. That being said, this is very accessible. So we see people from SOCs that are experienced that came to the training. We have junior people. We have system engineers that come in, consultants. So basically, if you have to do something with security, this is definitely going to help you understand the problem and how to deal with that. It's aimed at partners and end users, and right now it's being delivered in EMEA only. But that being said, there is challenges with time zones, but we kind of can play with that. If we have enough students in a class, we can shift the time zone, or we can move it up a few hours. So we'll see how the whole travel thing evolves. We prefer to do these trainings in classroom anyhow, preferably in a nice location with good weather, like Hawaii or Aruba or whatever. We actually had somebody from Aruba in the training. He was complaining about the fact it was 3 o'clock in the morning for him. I'm like, really? Like, it's 29 degrees, you're on an island, leave me alone, all right? So And this is another one of those things, like, why would these people follow this? Like, we're trying to kind of also get in people's heads and say, like, there needs to be a feedback loop between the people that are actually operating a SOC and the architects, right? Where, yeah, you can get external threat intelligence and whatnot, but the real value of threat intelligence is internal threat intelligence. It's live, it's what's going on in your environment. And you want to have, you know, when you have people that are analyzing and monitoring the environment, they need to feed back to your engineering guys, to your architects, say, like, we're missing certain, you know, we have blind spots, we're missing certain data. How could we get to get all the DNS traffic, for example? Can we get logs, or do we need to deploy a network sensor? So these two silos need to start working together, and in order to do that, both need to kind of understand what's the ask, why is that needed, what do we need to do to make that happen? Do we need to go collect stuff on the endpoint or on the network, or where do we start, and what are you going to do with it? And that's linked also to, you know, both of these need to talk to the business, right? What is the business losing their sleep on if something happens? So that's also something we kind of try to stress in the training. So I see another question come in here. You should give a training in Hawaii. Hey, if you can make it happen, let me know. Let me see, if you need somebody to carry the luggage. Yeah, okay, I'll think about that. Okay, so we're going to close off here. I think probably enough information. There is data sheets, landing pages. We post on LinkedIn. If you need information, you know, talk to me. We have a landing page where you can go and you basically, if you put in there your information and the country that you're from, we'll make sure that somebody from that country, from Exclusive Networks, will reach out to you and that they kind of go through what is necessary to follow the training. Just tooting our own horn a little bit here, but this is some feedback from tryouts. Now, since the tryouts, we have delivered this training 3 times, I believe. We keep the classes quite small, 10, 12 people, so we can make it very highly interactive. But this is like just for reference, right? We've had some really nice feedback from people, so we're having a very good time with this. People sending more people over as well, so it's really fun to hear that it actually does answer a lot of questions that people have. The next trainings, so this month, the 24th and the 25th, we actually don't have 10 seats available anymore. There's a bunch of seats taken. And then there is another one in March. The link is here as well, so tiny URL, Trenton Academy. You can always see the next trainings that we are planning. Some frequently asked questions. We'll share the slides afterwards. But so these are some of the questions we had. Don't send salespeople. Sorry, salespeople, but you won't have fun. We won't have fun. Let's not do that. We try to deliver it once a month, but we do more. This month we did 2 trainings, right? And we just had one partner sending about 11 people on training, and then now sending some more. So we can also do exclusive. This is kind of funny, but no pun intended. Exclusive trainings. If you say, like, actually we want to have a training just for our people, we can do that. If you have enough students, you can keep it all in-house, so you don't have to worry about sharing information with maybe other people. No vendors in the training. We do mention here and there where certain technologies do actually fit in or help with suppressing noise or automating certain things, but this is not a vendor training, right? We are not going to talk about how you install firewall X, Y, or Z, or any kind of endpoint or whatnot. So yeah, I think that's most of the stuff here. Yeah, again, this is just the dates. I'll open it up if there is questions. If anybody wants to know something, happy to answer. You can also reach out afterwards. I think I share my email address at the last slide, but I don't see anything happen